This is the return of Counterpoints. We're back. We had a little hiatus for whatever reason. You don't need to worry why. And we're back. And as usual, we're not going to do the usual talk show thing where it's like, just the transfers, drama in the scene, etc. In general, like I said at the beginning when we made this show, I want this show to be more about like we watch the games and then we give our takes based on that angle. Like what's it going to be like in the server? How will teams function, etc. At the same time, we're never going to have game footage come up and go through all the rounds and all that stuff. I actually think that's one thing. Put it this way, I've been around the game long enough to know that doesn't sell. No one watches that stuff. Even when you all tell me you watch Ash videos, you don't. You're just lying. You blatantly don't watch them. You might click them and watch parts of them, and you might watch half of it and then go, I'll come back to this and put it on that watch list. And we all know that watch list is like it's like back in the day when we didn't have videos. That's like the Internet Explorer bookmarks page. That just becomes a fucking graveyard. You never go back. You never read the articles. So I know what sells. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss, and then we're going to. So I thought. My suggestion for Pimp was that we talk about FURIA. I think they're like a really interesting topical squad we can get into. And then after that, we might have another one. We'll see how long we go on this one before we get to that one. And we've got another one in the chamber too, potentially. So to start with here, Pimp, I actually want to ask this question. And obviously, I'm just going to have to trust that you're going to be honest here because I haven't got the chance to research this. But back when this move was made, people, if you go all the way back, I think the last tournament that the Brazilian lineup played was, I think, PGL Bucharest. Because I think after that, I think it was the Astana one was where FURIA came along and they had that run and suddenly everyone was like, holy shit, is this team actually good? Right? When that move was announced, though, they took the Brazilian squad and basically... I mean, to be fair, a lot of discussion around that time was like, can you even get any of the Brazilian players out of teams? Can you get the good players from Pain or MIBR or, are these players even available? So they made this move, which I think is actually, it's underrated. It's one of the most shocking moves I've ever seen because the perception was Brazilians are never going to play with anyone except maybe like, an Argentinian or fucking someone from Chile or something. So the idea that they announced, not only is YEKINDAR joining, that already sounds like some April Fool's joke, like YEKINDAR's joining the Brazilian team, but also then molodoy was joining, and you have to remember this is when nobody knew molodoy. He wasn't even a player, if people don't know, that was sort of like touted as a big talent and people were watching. He wasn't some KSCERATO player. So when this was announced, do you remember what was your sense when you heard this move? What was your initial reaction?
Yeah, I think I liked it in the sense that I was done with FURIA. Like for 3 years, we constantly had to talk about FURIA. We constantly had FURIA tournaments, and they were just a non-factor for such a long time that I was super pissed whenever I had to cover FURIA game because there was no new angle, there was no interesting things about the lineup. It was the same old. Maybe yuurih's playing well, maybe KSCERATO has a good game, and then maybe they're competitive. They never really figured it out. So when I first saw that they brought in YEKINDAR and molodov, I was split in between. It's nice that they're finally doing something drastic. It took you 2 years too long or 3 years too long to do something. But I was also a little bit disappointed in the drastic change of the caliber. As you said, like molodoy, no one knew who he was, so I didn't really judge him, neither for the good or for the bad. And YEKINDAR in that lineup, on paper, didn't really seem like a massive upgrade or someone who would come in and change the entire thing. And adding to that as well, then having FalleN become a rifling in-game leader. It was just a bunch of question marks at that point. So I don't think I was negative when I saw the change. I was just like, finally something is happening. Maybe that turns out to be interesting. But in my mind, it was just going to be another year of, FURIA, they're not relevant. I don't care about FURIA. It's not a team that I have to really pay too much attention to because if they're lucky, they're part of the group stage. If not, they won't even qualify for the tournament. So I've been very surprised with how well they've been playing, as has everyone. I don't think anyone could have seen that coming. But in terms of the change, good that something happened, but it wasn't a blockbuster move where I was like, oh, this is exciting. I was just like, yeah, whatever, something changed. Let's see.
Yeah, the funny thing is I was actually quite skeptical because I actually think both the players they brought in had huge question marks. Like YEKINDAR at that point in his career. I mean, if people don't know, here's the problem. I can give him a mild pass for when he was the IGL of Team Liquid because, listen, a lot of great players have made that mistake and tried to be the IGL and it hasn't worked, or at least it hasn't worked in the first year, this for 6 months or whatever, and then they have to give it up. And classically, it's very rare you go back to being as good as the individual player when you do that. But the part I don't give him a pass for, and everyone else does for some bizarre reason, is the rest of the time in Team Liquid. Because I can tell you, like the Cadian lineup, I know I never got around to doing that video, but I'll do it soon because everyone's out at Team Liquid anyway now, so there's no fucking drama. None of them are IGL IGLs anymore, so it's not like it's going to ruin their careers. I'll do that soon because I have loads of like behind the scenes info people don't have still. It's not like stuff like, Twisty's girlfriend was saying that. There's none of that shit. It's actual real, like, interesting stuff about how the team was set up and who did what. And all I'll tell you is, I'll give him a minor break for the Cadian period, because put it this way, from what I've heard, a lot of that's on Cadian. Like, that was the one team where he sort of egoed and he tried to just be the guy. Everything went through him and he was the God Emperor and everyone else was just a pawn in his chess game. So in that world, I also don't totally blame YEKINDAR, even though he didn't play very well. But my problem is, he had that whole period afterwards where he was with Twists, and I can tell you, in that team, Twists and YEKINDAR, in English we call it thick as thieves. They were like that, mate. They were the two that were like on the same page, studying the game the same way, coming up with playbooks. So in that world, mate, if you don't then get good form out of your game again, when you're not at the IGL, presumably in that team, you're getting your spots, and you've got sort of a mate of yours calling for you, who you agree with, then I think people should doubt you if you then go to, checks notes, a team that used to speak Portuguese, which you don't speak as far as I know. So I think that's a totally legitimate one. I don't think anyone would know he would bounce back to this level. In fact, if we get into the players in a second, I actually think what we've learned about YEKINDAR is people thought, because people had such a reductive thought about how James teams played in Virtus Pro. They thought everyone plays in the team like James and you just play Beatty. And then YEKINDAR came along like some revelation, just busting open the game. People really thought YEKINDAR was the play. You just drop into any team. From what I've seen, that's not the case at all. He actually needs like an environment created around himself where he can excel and he isn't forced to do the things he's not good at and to make decisions he's not necessarily capable of making. So I think that's a totally legitimate question mark, by the way. In fact, I even think when we get to it, I even think people actually go a little bit too far. For me, he's still not as good as he was back in that VP era when he actually was. He was legit one of the best players in the world then. He was fucking nuts. Yep. And then the molodoy one, I won't even give any thoughts because at the time I'd never seen molodoy play. He was a totally irrelevant player. The one angle was, though, it's funny, even though I was skeptical, it was actually his signing that I actually liked, because I remember thinking, right, this has done two things. One, we've taken FalleN off the AWP. Listen, you can like FalleN all you like, but you'll never want your team, if you want them to win majors, to have an AWPer that's super old and not that good anymore. Like, that's just not a recipe for success. Like, I'd just challenge anyone. Tell me people have won the major and that's what ever with an AWPer that's not that good and is super old. I don't think it's ever happened. And the idea they're going to IGL at the same time, like, you're asking too much, bro. Like, the last person who did that was James, and the last one who could have done it was Katie, and that's it. Like, no one else is going to do it from that role. And then, so my angle on molodoy was, since I hadn't seen him, and nobody could know he would be that good at tier 1. I even think he took a little bit of progression, but it's still one of the rookie breakouts of the year. The problem with the molodoy angle is this. I thought, right, the positive is this. It doesn't matter if he's good or not. Since you picked him up as a rando from nowhere, it's not a guy with massive... I doubt you had to pay some huge buyout or anything, but it was really easy to get. In fact, the joke is, as people will know, they were considering Grix and other people like that. Like, there was many people could have got this spot. The reason I think that was a positive move for me was, by signing 2 non-Brazilians, you showed that you weren't just going to go, let's see how YEKINDAR does. Oh, it doesn't work. Back to Brazilian only. Like, no, as soon as you break it open, now you can get any international AWPer. And if you ever look in FURIA, AWPer is always the role, even before FalleN. They have always struggled for the AWPer. That's why we all, in a weird sense, like, sort of idealised that period online when they had Henny and they just looked awesome for a while. They never got to the lands. We never saw that team play, but because they've never been a team around the AWPer. So to me, you had to, at this point in your career, open up, because the only other Brazilian AWPers right now is NQZ and Safe. You've already tried Safe. NQZ, I don't know that he's ever going to be like top 5 in the world, you know what I mean? So I didn't mind it in that sense. I thought it was a good gamble. I did think he was stuck in a rut. And from everything I've heard, it is impossible to get those players. I mean, you can't just sign the Insanis of the world, and they're just not available. And if they were, it would be so much money that actually it might even financially be worth opening up like this and going international. So I actually think that part, the expectations, I think are totally fair. I agree with you. I don't know anyone who said this would be a top team.
No, nobody. And as you said, like, the Brazilian scene as a whole, we had a whole theme during the Austin Major, where the entire scene has just been stagnating. There was no good teams. There was a lot of good players spread out on 6 different teams, but none of them were good. None of them were any good. And as you said, it was impossible to acquire those players. Buyouts in Brazilian Counter-Strike is ridiculous. The amount you have to pay for mediocre players is ridiculous. So it just felt like they were hard stuck. So I remember during that tournament, I was like, yeah, sure. I remember Legacy obviously did better than we expected. Yep. I think Pain getting all the way into the semifinal, and FURIA in the quarterfinal. It was sort of like a bounce back, but I thought after the tournament, it's probably just a one-off, because none of the teams are going to change. None of the teams are going to look significantly better post-major, because they can't really buy players from each other, and we can't still transfer the best parts from one team to another. So In terms of the gamble with FURIA, bringing in molodoy, bringing in YEKINDAR, as you said, if you want to dive into the players, I think for molodoy, we can talk about how well he's done after he joined the team, but no one could have forecasted that. No one could have seen that coming. And even FalleN himself or FURIA themselves took a massive risk and a massive gamble. And they said that, sure, he was great in practice, but who could have seen him being as great as he were? Who could have seen him come in with that attitude where he didn't really care, where he performed on the stages pretty much from the get-go? The big one for me is FalleN. You know, the big one, as you kind of described right here, having a guy who his entire career has been an AWPing in-game leader. And as you said, for the past 3 years, he has been a big part of the reason as why FURIA have been, dare I say, shit. You know, they've been irrelevant. They've been horrible compared to the budget they've had to work with, compared to having KSCERATO and yuurih in their prime, and they never really got the most out of them. And I partly blame FalleN for that, you know, because I don't think he was doing good enough with the AWP, and I don't think his calling was good enough to sort of mask the fact that he wasn't a great AWPer anymore. And that's also something you have to take into account. So for me, the biggest change was putting him from an AWPing in-game leader to a rifling in-game leader. Sure, we can talk YEKINDAR. Sure, we can talk molodoy. And obviously, they've done a lot of good stuff for FURIA. But for FalleN to make that transition and be successful with it, that is the biggest surprise. And that's what I'm the most, I guess, impressed by within that whole FURIA camp. Because I also do think that if you were to put FalleN through a lie detector, I think he was setting up his retirement. I think he was setting it up so that he could in-game lead for maybe 3 or 4 months. He could do one more major, and if everything went well, maybe he would do half a season more, and then he would retire. I think if you asked him, that was the plan all along, and I think he's even hinted that in certain interviews that this could be the last season for him. But I think with how well they're playing right now, with how well he's calling, with how well the team is functioning, with how well he's doing as an individual as well, compared to where we thought he would be. I thought he was going to be a karrigan version 2, maybe even worse, which is, you know, not great at the moment, but he's even better. He's doing a better job than karrigan in the fragging department, and I think he's even calling better at the moment. I don't think we necessarily have to see FalleN retire. I think he's going to ride this one out for as long as it makes sense, for as long as they continue to do well. And then I think it's always in the back of his mind that the second they start to fall off, or the second that FalleN is not keeping up to par with the rifling duties anymore, then they can make the change. Then he can transition into becoming a coach or retire or whatever. So I think, you know, from a player mindset, having a guy who's already accepted that I am going to retire within a couple of months, this could be my last tournament, then somehow, some way, finding in him to become good enough to a point where he can't really afford to retire, or where FURIA as a team, you know, can't really afford him to retire, because they can't replace him with someone who's doing better than he is right now, which to me is crazy, because I thought he was done. I thought FalleN was, you know, we can speak about his career for as long as we want to, but in this very moment, before he transitioned from an AWPing in-game leader to the rifling in-game leader he is now, he was a liability in FURIA. He was not good enough, and I think he would agree with that as well. So for him to make a comeback like that to me is the biggest story when it comes to FURIA. And then yes, we can speak YEKINDAR, and yes, molodoy has been a revelation and maybe the best signing of 2025, or at least in contention for it. But that molodoy signing wouldn't have looked as impressive had FalleN not been able to transition into an in-game leading rifler instead of the AWPing. And to me, that's hella impressive. Also set up molodoy, you know, to get in and kind of craft his own role within FURIA. And, you know, you can say what you want about FalleN, but having him as a mentor with the AWP, maybe he couldn't do it himself anymore, mechanically speaking, but he knew what required to be a great AWPer, especially a combat AWPer like molodoy is as well. So I think there's a lot of things that now, you know, seeing as how well they're playing, it start to make sense. But as you said, skeptical. I was very skeptical. I think everyone was in their good right to be skeptical. And I think if you were to ask FURIA, if you were to ask FalleN himself, then it was a Hail Mary. You know, it was the last attempt before he would retire. Maybe it would work out, maybe it didn't, but it just turned out to be magical. And let's see for how long, because it's just a question of time still when he will eventually hang up the mouse and retire. But maybe he just bought himself another year. Who knows?
I think it was even implied that there was like pressure from both sides. Like he knew he was in a spot where like you're not going to win anymore if you're doing this, but also maybe the team were like time to become a coach or something, or take a step back or whatever it might be. So actually, this like compromise, I agree. Like it's basically. I also think if you put on the lie detector test, this wasn't like, this part of the move wasn't scouted that it would work. This is just like you said, it's Hail Mary. It's the last card you've got to play. If it works, you keep playing. If it doesn't, well, then you tried everything. Okay, now you can actually just leave, and you can leave with a clear conscience that like, I'm never going to be plagued by the what if. Like, obviously the worst thing if you were FalleN is that you retire and you're like, oh wait, I could have actually just been I basically could have done what KDN failed to do. I could have become a non-AWPing IGL. I could have brought in a different person as my AWPer, and then I could have had some success still, because as you say, karrigan's the best example ever. He's basically done like a decade of not fragging people at this point in time. But here's the point, and there's a quick a quick angle here that I think people miss, which is, you know how right now, if you followed FaZe, this is not news. You know, right now, everyone's like, after every game where karrigan has a red score, they're like, fire him! He must retire! Right? The problem is, people have been saying that for half a decade. Literally half a decade. Because the problem is, this is actually a compliment to karrigan. People expect every single karrigan team to be able to win a tournament or to win a major, right? That's why every map he plays badly, even though, by the way, I'd argue in CSGO CS2 he's more of a legend than FalleN. I think he just is. I think if you look at what he's done, there's a reason no one has FalleN in the GOAT conversation for IGL. Like, it's not even a discussion. So to me, why do people treat karrigan more harshly than FalleN? Here's why. Because actually nobody thought FURIA could win. And everyone looked at their roster, the all Brazilian one, and they were like, yeah, it's got like, basically it's got KSCERATO, and then you have to just hope, yuurih has some bounce back games. He had some occasionally. But basically in that team, everyone had already accepted we're not going to win. So instead, their whole thing was, hey, at least I get to see FalleN play a bit more. Maybe he wins a clutch. Maybe he has the presente half of a CT map, where he frags out with the AWP, and I get to have those cool nostalgic vibes, etc. It reminds me of this whole rain conversation now. We'll probably get too late in this episode. My problem is I never tell people to retire, especially if you're a legend. But what I do say is this: you don't get to just be, there's no legends parking spot on major winners. That doesn't exist. Like, you have to actually be good at your role to some degree on a major winner. Otherwise, if you don't win those majors, you're just holding back KSCERATO. You're holding back the people who could do that and could win the major right now. And I think in a fucked up way, that's actually gross. That's sort of like the older generation vampirizing the young generation to get a little bit more life themselves. But it's like, bro, if we'd have done that to the older players, then you never would have seen some of the great players in history, because they'd have been stuck with some old IGL. I mean, by the way, you saw this in other scenes. God B eventually had to retire. He couldn't hit a barn with a fucking frying pan, bro. And it doesn't matter how good tactically he was. On his team, he didn't have 4 stars. And that brings me back to the karrigan angle. And I think FalleN has met the mark that I have for players like this. If you're not going to be a strong player at all mechanically as an IGL, obviously you better be a wicked IGL. Luckily, karrigan has managed to live up to that many, many times. Every time everyone says he's done, he bounces back, he gets the squad. But I think one of the problems is this. The reason FaZe now, I think, is fucked is they're trying to GM like a normal team and make like shrewd pickups. No. FaZe Clan always, for me, was we ran the team with stars, and then karrigan just makes the calls and the stars win the game. That's what he's essentially a player manager. We don't actually have those in football anymore, but it used to be a thing that great players who were captains did at the end of their career for the last few years. You keep them in the game, but they essentially sort of like captain the game, and they're not the star anymore. They just run the team. That's what karrigan gets to do. He's basically a coach that gets to play in the server, which if you have star players, mate, is OP. The problem is if you just have a normal team and he's supposed to frag people and do stuff, then you're going to have a lot of fucking problems. So I think FalleN had reached that point where if the molodoy move and the YEKINDAR move didn't work, I also think this would just be a last season and he would retire, mate. And everyone would be able to go happily off into the sunset. FURIA would go a different route. Who knows what they do at that point in time? You tell me. And so I think the key thing here is this. Because molodoy and YEKINDAR moves both worked out, especially the molodoy one, way more than everyone could. Put it this way, everyone I know has this guy top 3 AWPer in the whole world, like the whole world. Which means, by the way, they're going in there and nudging out people like a Shiro or a fucking Monacy potentially, fucking Torji. They're taking people who make, but here's the thing, it's sort of deserved. You look at the guy's potential, what he can do. I see why those conversations are happening, and I agree they may be jumping the gun a little bit. You've got to give them people a bit more sort of sample size. Some of those players earned it over years, But that's the thing. You look at the squad they have now. I always describe it this way, right? If you're going to look at raw firepower, the 3rd or 4th best players on this team probably are YEKINDAR and yuurih. If they can play their roles and they're your 3rd or 4th most strong players and mechanical players, then you have got a really strong mechanical team. You basically have FalleN's FaZe Clan here. He's got the team with the other players that can all do it. So I think right now, this team, you can run for a while, mate. Look, they've still got their own issues. And even then, by the way, I don't know how much of how you've tried to like study their T-side, but bro, I'll tell you something really interesting as well. A long time ago, Brazilian CS was the famous stereotype. It was Samba CS, which is the idea you just look for like a read and you just rush the site basically. And, you know, people play off high tempo, high activity, make it confusing and chaotic, and then you let your star players frag out. Bro, this team doesn't play that way. Like, they actually play quite slow on T-side. Like, one thing I've noticed interesting is when people have their jobs, it looks like they let people do their jobs. If you're playing like a Mirage, they'll let you really just work around that palace all day long and wait. Does he want to take a peek? Does he want to stay back? Does he want to kill the guy trying to fly? YEKINDAR, by the way, does not at all have the mission of like run in first every round in the first. No, mate, they give him space to work. He has time to set up his shots, or they slowly take the map. I'll tell you the reason on the FalleN angle. We can talk with the others after if you want. The reason why the FalleN angle also has then worked out way better, in my opinion, is one thing people actually forgot about FalleN when he was even the IGL the last few years, is if you ever went on that stats page, he always had one of the highest opponent flash stats of any player, by the way, fuck AWPers or IGLs. He had one of the highest of anyone. So he clearly actually has a utility game, which is, if you notice, that's actually the thing I'll give FalleN full marks for. Not just giving up the AWP. Bro, he essentially, and he said as much on my talk show recently, he's made himself the taco. He's the support player now. He didn't go, well, I'll be like the rifler, but, you know, let me get in that pack and let me get fucking, I wanted to get some trade. No, he understands on this team what I just said. Like, I've got the 4 players that do that, mate. My job now is pilot them, and I'll throw flashes for them. I'll throw utility. I'll throw the smoke that makes the space that YEKINDAR can go into and take a one-on-one. Bro, that's actually, I'll give him props for that, because that is their karrigan move. Because I always tell people, if you ever watch karrigan now, bro, you can tell he knows he can't hit a shot when he runs in. That's why I actually think a karrigan death is actually way better on the entry than a lot of bad stats IGLs, because he will actually intentionally take the fight where it's like, I will get traded though if I take this angle. I'm probably not going to get a kill myself. And also, I'm creating the space so we can take the site. It's there's a different, I know it sounds mad, but even dying on an entry can have value beyond just running into a fucking blender. So I'll give FalleN full props for that. I do think he has like humbled himself to some degree, and he understands, yeah, this is the last chapter. I know what you mean. It's not like, oh, this is the bounce back and I'm going to play 5 more years. No, I'm with you. If they play more than a year more, I think they'll have had to have some really big results.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is basically, you know, we see it all the time. I feel like in both with players, but also in normal sports. The second you, as a player, you know, as a team, the second you quote unquote give up, the second that FalleN makes the decision, of the second that he knows that, okay, I am going to retire in a couple of months, you know, that's when he's fully willing to sacrifice everything. The ego goes away, the expectations goes away, that he can do no wrong. You know, if it doesn't work out, doesn't matter. I'm going to retire anyway in a couple of months. So I think, as you said, like, he's completely stripped off all the, I wouldn't say pressure, but all the responsibilities and all the notion of maybe he could do some more with the rifle, or maybe he could still get back to a decent AWP living where he wouldn't be a liability anymore. Like, the second you give up, sometimes players just disappear, and sometimes players actually have a second life, so to speak. And I think that's what we're seeing with FalleN. He's always been great with utility. I think he's always sought after, you know, a team that would fully buy into a system as well. We remember when FalleN was in Team Liquid, they never really, like, they whenever you had a FalleN interview, whenever you spoke to one of his teammates, like, no one has ever had a bad word to say about FalleN. I think he's all good intentions, but the most used phrase was always, we want to be on the same page. We can't really figure out how to get on the same page. I want to do one thing. I want to play slow, methodical. I want to play team play, Counter-Strike, and the other guys want to be a bit more free-flowing, and we're trying to find a middle ground. And that's always been the case with pretty much all the iterations of the teams FalleN has been on. The entirety of his time in Team Liquid, they couldn't really get on the same page, and it was a phrase they kept using. And I was like, okay, it's a year and a half now. Are you ever going to get on the same page, or do you just, you know, go one page or another? And I think it was even the same in FURIA to some degree, that when he came in, he's always been a smart player. He's always been very aware of where he could contribute, or where he could, I guess, set up his teammates and how a team should play in order to get the most out of whatever he had to work with. But that does require 4 other players and a coach, for that matter, to fully buy into the system. And as long as you have 1 or 2 players not fully buying into it, it's always going to be a mouse and cat game where someone is trying to catch up, or someone is trying to get on the same page. And maybe they agree on certain maps or certain positions to do it one way, but then they want freedom in another map or in another position, and it never gets to like the full motion. And I think that's what he's got right now. I think when you bring in a guy like YEKINDAR, he also is very aware that was the best possible offer he could get. Like, YEKINDAR goes to FURIA, that's another chance of playing Tier 1 Counter-Strike. If that doesn't work out, YEKINDAR...
People forget, bro, he was even technically on trial, I believe, to begin with. I think they only signed him around the major, like, properly. So even that was probably an experiment, yeah.
That was an experiment. And again, it's easy to experiment when you've given up. It's easy to experiment when you hit rock bottom. And I think for YEKINDAR as well, he also came in with that, mentality that if this doesn't work out, there's a chance that I don't sign on another pro team because nobody wants to play with me anymore. He's done so poorly for such a long time that no other tier 1 team would be willing to take a risk on him. He'd probably have to go down in tier 2, maybe even tier 3. So I think you have this installation of players now, and molodoy for that matter as well, who's obviously coming in, and whatever FalleN says is God's word. So all of a sudden, FalleN now has the team that he's been dreaming of for 5 or 6 years, where everyone will listen to him. I don't know enough about KSCERATO to be like if he's ever challenging FalleN, or if his way of thinking Counter-Strike is different. Or same goes for yuurih. We don't really get to know too much about them, but I get the notion that since they re-signed that contract with FURIA, for a couple of years, what is it, half a year ago or a year ago, when FalleN was still the in-game leader, they must agree whatever he's doing. And now for the first time, I feel like he has the team where whatever FalleN says, whatever he does, everyone is buying into the system. And I think that's all he wanted. I think that's all he was ever asking for a long time. And now it's working out. So I don't know. It's to me, it's interesting, and it's very fun to follow, because I do think there's a world where FalleN still retires in 3 or 4 months. I think it's very interesting to watch FURIA right now. I think whatever happens at the major, there's a world where they crash out of the group stage and they make it to stage 2, stage 3, whatever, don't make the playoff, and then I think he will retire. But just the fact that we're having a conversation right now where FURIA, for 5 hours, were the number 1 ranked team in VRS, currently number 5 on the HLTV rankings, the title contenders, dare I say it, they go into the major as one of the teams who potentially can win the major. Just to have that conversation is way, way better than anyone expected. So I think regardless of what happens in 3 or 4 months from now, regardless of whether FalleN retires after this season or not, I think just the fact that we're having this conversation and we can make an hour episode on it, I think that's super, super cool. And if I were to bet, I'd be honest, I'd say that there's a great likelihood that FalleN probably will retire within the next 6 months. I don't think this is sustainable for a long, long time, but I think right now they're making the absolute most out of it. And I also think it's a case of FalleN maybe knowing that right now there's nobody in the Brazilian scene or nobody internationally that I feel can do the job better than me. And if someone comes around, let's say Shuhei or whatever gets relief from Liquid, or someone of that caliber, or someone from Gamer Legion, CTR, whatever. If he feels like a player, whether that's a Brazilian player or a European player, can come into FURIA and do better than he will, I think he will retire. But right now, I don't think there's a player that is obvious that they can get hold of that it can do a better job than FalleN, and I think he'll continue to play for as long as that's the case. But if someone becomes available where he's like, okay, I'm ready to let him take over, I think that will happen. And after the next major circuit, who knows what happens in the player market, and who knows what in-game leaders are tired of playing in the teams. So I think it's still up for debate. And I think as much as the fans are having a tough time maybe accepting that this is not going to last forever, nothing is a fairy tale, then enjoy it for now, because it could be 2 or 3 months and then he's gone anyway. It could be 6 months. It could be 12 months. I'm just in for the ride.
Yeah, for me, the only issue with expectations currently is that they did win that Fisher Playground. I think it would almost have been better for fans.
Kind of fucked them up,
if they'd come second. If the Mongols had won, who was the higher ranked team and recently won an event, I think if you'd have come second, it'd keep people reasonable. Because the problem is, you've seen since then and before, they're not a team that's consistently going to be in finals and semis, and that wasn't a giant event. Let's just be really. It had like some good teams, a couple of really good ones. By the way, they beat them. Fair enough. They beat Falcons. They beat them. G2. They beat Mongols. Those were the good teams at the tournament, but it didn't have the spirits of the world, etc. The problem you have is this. I also agree. Like if you ask me today, what are the expectations for the major? I actually think this team has a fairly wide range. Yeah, they do have just bombing out in the Swiss. They could go 1-3. They could get the wrong teams on the wrong maps. They could have one of those days where I do think in their team the names sometimes look bigger than they are. Like yuurih isn't the player he was 3-4 years ago. YEKINDAR isn't the player he was 3-4. So the problem is if you ever have a game where FalleN, yuurih, and YEKINDAR all have an off game, you're fucking dead. You're gonna have a really hard time winning at that point in time. Like molodoy and KSCERATO are really good, but they're not fucking donk. You know what I mean? Like they're not just gonna hard carry the game. So I think I'm with you. They could bomb out there, but I tell you what, I also see a world where forget this last major, because actually that was a minor failure for them when they got that bracket. That was Mongols on the other side with FaZe, both teams which are like okay, no one expects them in the final, and then they had Pin. They should have been in the semis. So if I say now they could make the semis, I mean for real, they could make the semis now and actually beat a good team in the quarters, like someone legit. So I would say semis is a good realistic expectation for the major. Group stage could happen. But here's the problem though, Pimp. That's why the win, I say, is a little bit sort of fool's gold. Because I also think, say you have like a bunch of what for this team would be consistent results. You go to the really big tier 1 tournaments and you make a bunch of quarters, some semis, maybe you make one finals run. I actually don't think that is enough to make the FalleN thing stay, mate. Like, I think the difference, especially when you're at the end of your career, it's the same for karrigan. The difference between winning the event and coming second and having a cool run cool runs are for up and comers, you know what I mean? They're for people who are underdogs, are not supposed to be there. If you actually believe your team can win, winning is so much different than coming to the semis and then going, well, we lost to the champ. Like, I do feel like you probably have to win a tournament, you know what I mean? Or you have to make like a really good run at the major where it's like, wow, we could build up. This was a fluke. You know, we didn't just get an easy bracket. Like maybe we beat like, you know, Falcons in the quarters. Maybe we beat Mongols in the quarters. If you do something like that, then people are going to take notice. But it can't be that you make the quarters and beat like, you know, the new Team Liquid and then you make the semis and then go, yeah, sign up for 2 more years. Like, no, I'm with you. At some point, you're going to have to pull the plug on the project, not least because think about that phase factor I said. And then you have to ask yourself the question of, okay, it worked with FalleN. Thanks for the transition period. But actually, if these other players are all really good, what if we did bring in a different IGL Pimp? And as you say, it's an international squad now. Maybe then we do win. Maybe then with KSCERATO and molodoy and these, maybe now we can actually win if we brought. So luckily because they won this event, it's down the line. They're going to play out this season. But I agree. After this season, a fan might think because you won that event, you know, now you just locked in for 3-4 years. No, because he's so old in the game. So I do think it's like he's bought himself some time and he's certainly made this conversation way more interesting. Tell you what, that's because I'm with you. There is also the dark horse chance they could win the major. It very rarely ever happens in CS, but like I do think if you had to list in order, if these teams play their best at the major, who can win? Oh, this team would be like 5th or 6th. They'd be in with a chance. They're not going to put it this way. You'd still take like a Vitality out of form. You'd still take, you know, some of the certain other squads to get there. But I agree, it is possible now. But and if we go back to the beginning conversation, that was unthinkable when they made this roster move.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I think the dangerous. I think again. Maybe it's just me, you know, from my personal perspective, but I feel like once a player have made the decision, because FalleN did make an internal decision with himself that I'm going to retire. You know, he even hinted that in certain interviews that if it didn't work out, he'd just retire in a couple of months or he'd play whatever tournaments need to be and then they would find someone else. I think that's what makes them dangerous. I think they're coming into the major with FalleN being like, obviously he wants to win, but I feel like there's no pressure in the sense that if it doesn't work out, it doesn't change shit for him. Like, it doesn't change his resume, it doesn't change his legacy, it doesn't change anything anymore. Whereas before, he knew that if he would go out of FURIA without ever making them relevant, with having a 3-year or 2-year period where we stopped talking about them, where I never wanted to freaking tweet about them or talk about them, or whenever I had to cover a FURIA game, I was like, yeah, whatever, it's the same thing. You know, I could just repeat whatever I said a year ago at the same segment because nothing has changed. I think that would have been a bittersweet feeling for FalleN with the legacy that he's having. Now I feel like he's done enough with FURIA. He's brought them back to life. He's brought them back to a point where, as you said, title contenders potentially for the major. Maybe that's a bit shooting over the line, we'll see. But as you said, like definitely a top 5, top 6 team heading into it. And I think that's enough for him. I think that is the bottom line, you know, whereas whatever happens from now, he's done his job now and he can go out, you know, rest in peace and feel good about it. And I think that's a dangerous mindset to have for everyone else, because I don't think that's the same for karrigan right now. I think if he were to retire right now, which I don't think is the case, then what we will remember is a couple of years where FaZe just couldn't figure it out, you know, or the same old notion with karrigan that, yes, he made a lot of different teams work out, but his big caveat was always the fact that they would burn out eventually. Like, absolutely. The play style of karrigan would always be in Astralis or in Mouse or now in FaZe, you know, that yes, it would work out for a year and then he couldn't reinvent himself. And I think there's still that notion to that, because I do think that as much as I want to compare FalleN and karrigan in that sense, I think one player has made the decision that he's ready to retire and the other one is desperately trying to make a case not to retire or make a case not to even have that conversation with himself, because I don't think karrigan is even considering retirement right now, but maybe he will be forced to if he doesn't figure it out in FaZe. So I think that in itself is a dangerous mindset to come in with a tournament. And then obviously, as you said, like having molodoy as a player that, yes, we can have the conversation whether he's a top 3 AWPer as of right now. He's definitely in the conversation. I don't think he is, but he's up there. I think having that guy, you know, with that playing mood, you know, with that desire to just come in and continue to develop and whatnot, maybe he becomes a top 3 AWPer. Maybe he's closing the gap to the likes of Monacy, Saiwu for that matter. Who knows? And I think if that is the case, then that could also buy FalleN. That could also buy FURIA some more time where that is helping to mask maybe some of the minor flaws that the team is still having. And then I think another underrated, you know, conversation, and that's why the episode is about FURIA. Like KSCERATO and yuurih, we always spoke about them as a duo, and if they played well together, then FURIA could potentially upset, or they could potentially get into the playoff. But ever since molodoy and YEKINDAR have joined, and ever since FalleN has taken a step back and actually left more space to those two, they're also performing better. They're still two of the highest rated players within the team, and KSCERATO is back to a level where he's once again considered one of the better players with the rifle, where he did have a period where it was just, he's doing all right, but he's not a game-changing player anymore. So it does feel like the entire team has just had an uplift, and if that continues, and if molodoy continues to develop, then they are a team to look out for to potentially clinch another title. As you said, the FURIA event that's a good step. That's a good tournament to win. That's not easy, but it wasn't one of the highest caliber of tournaments, let's put it that way. So there's still more to get there for FURIA, and that's why they're so interesting. I don't know what the potential is at, and that sounds wild when you look at the lineup and you have FalleN, you have KSCERATO, you have yuurih, 3 players where we know where their ceiling is at, we know where the prospect is, but just having that molodoy X factor and maybe YEKINDAR, who's now found a second life, that makes them super, super interesting for me also to follow in the future. But yeah, as you said, if I were to put money where my mouth is, I think they do a decent job at the major, but I also do think that they are constantly monitoring the market, and whenever they find a replacement for FalleN that can in-game lead at a level that he's at right now, then I think they're ready to jump the gun, and I hope that FalleN is ready to maybe transition into a consultancy role within the team, or an assistant coach, or a joint coach with City or whatever, who's also doing a good job, by the way. So it'll be interesting to follow FURIA, because something is going to happen within that camp within the next 6 months, almost regardless of how they fare.
I also think the other reason why the dark horse potential is worth discussing is because obviously right now the scene is a mess. Like,
technically, it's a weak scene. Yeah.
The one team we were supposed to be able to rely on was Spirit, and they've just made a massive roster move. So we actually don't even know how that plays out yet, even though everyone I know is very positive about it. So at the moment, you also have the scenario. This is why you can get dark horses sometimes win the major, because you can have the scenario where you just get the people who have the good matchup. Like an example would be you have like Aurora beats, I don't know, Falcons, and then Aurora loses to Mongols, and then you beat them. You know what I mean? You can have a team where it's not like you didn't beat anyone, but you had the right teams take out the teams that would have beaten you, or would be your weakness and would be your matchup in that sense. So that in itself is what also throws it into so much interest. Obviously, then in theory, like the joke is the G2 episode. It's why, if you notice at the end of that, we didn't just glaze and bro. At the end, we were like, but this, like, we'll have to see how this turns out, though. This was like a honeymoon period. It has been. It's been fucking terrible since then. No, on the KSCERATO one, I even think that's why, if he's just going to stay in one team and just sign, right, I'm going to have to speculate because I don't know the guy. I've read interviews. I've noticed he's never really given like really strong opinions about a lot of stuff. I don't get the vibe of it that he really like cares or even notices that much what the IGLs do or who runs the team. He reminds me, I'll give people a quick story, right? I'll tell you what Forrest used to be like, even at his best in 1.6. So as usual, a dickhead fan will go, you don't like I was in FalleN's team and I used to travel to events with him and then watch the games he played at majors behind his PC. I know a lot more about FalleN than any little pleb who goes, I like him. I mean, Forrest, Forp, or whatever. Don't even say that joke. That was from 1.6. Forrest, wow, or whatever the fuck. Nice beard. He's in jail or whatever. Right? I'll tell you the interesting thing about FalleN. He's one of the players that taught me that IGLs and star players see the game completely differently. Because Forrest thought the same shit. Forrest thought Khan was overrated as an IGL. He used to think like, it just calls a strat and then, I shoot people in the head. And it's like, well, listen, certainly if I'm having a conversation with Khan about IGLs, I'll tell him, you do have an amazing player that shoots people in the head, mate. But at the same time, what he didn't appreciate was sometimes when you have a weaker IGL, it gets a lot harder to shoot people in the head, mate. Like, the setup isn't the same, the space isn't the same, the calls aren't the fucking same. You might even be on the right map in the V2. There's a million factors that suddenly you learn when it goes away. Like, oh shit. So I get the vibe, like, that KSCERATO is one of those players. For real, he sits down at the PC, he frags, bro. That's it. That's what he thinks CS is. He sits down, he gets the crosshair, and by the way, he has really good fucking mechanics. He shoots, he plays well when they're a bad team, he plays really well when they're a good team. And it doesn't seem like it gets to him, but at the same time, I don't feel like he's there in the strat book or telling, I need this in the game. That's actually also the YEKINDAR angle I found really interesting, because if you notice, they let art hang around a long time too, bro. Because I think the same thing, yuurih and KSCERATO were just sort of like, look, we're doing our fragging shit. You figure out the whole IGLing thing and all those smokes and that, and then, well, come on, bro, figure it out. It's like that sort of thing. Whereas actually, I'll tell you another thing from inside Team Liquid I know, which is that actually one thing to YEKINDAR's credit is even after he was the IGL, because he'd done all this hours studying the game and trying to come up with strats, he tried with both the Cadian and the Twist Swan to contribute to the playbook, to come up with players. Listen, Some of them might have been around him. Some of them might have just been things he saw in the game. And I actually think if you watch his game, it actually fits who he is as a profile, as an individual player. Because I think the area people have really misunderstood him. Maybe people like Donk have broken people's brains. He's not what you back in the day called like a hard entry. You don't just go, right, I'm going to hit B on fucking Mirage, throw him into the Wolves, and then we run him behind. No, like even if he goes B, he's going to be on the one where like you're just holding middle and he has a chance to like check out if the guy's there, take a timing if he's behind the wall, have a piece of utility, someone push somewhere else, then he's going to put... He's a guy who looks for his angles, and I can tell you, I think as an individual player, this is why he thought he could be an IGL, I think as an individual player, he actually does what a lot of those people I don't think do. I don't think Donk and Fur and those guys ever did go in the demo and study the opponent. I think they just thought, I'm going to find a timing I like and I'm going to shoot you in the head. YEKINDAR, as far as I know, does anti-strap from his own position, bro. He tries to like figure out what setups do people like, and if you ever watch his game, that's why he's not just hitting the same angle over and over and over again like a Xantares might be. He's actually trying to like, as almost like a mini entry IGL, like condition the opponents and see where... Well, if you have a player like that and he wants to be in the strap book, bro, and this is another thing FalleN I totally admitted on my shows, and if you ever listen to interviews, he'd have told you this. He also knew he wasn't the strongest IGL for a lot of years. His style, remember the style that took them to the top, like the late round style, you just freeze, you don't make plays, you play off each other, you combo. Everyone learned that eventually because they taught us it. They taught us all how to play CS like that. So unfortunately, that doesn't work anymore. Like, by the way, you do that back in the day, even the best players shit themselves and make a mistake and you kill them, right? In the modern day, you do that against like Nico Monacy. They also do that. That's what Nico does every time it's the middle of the fucking round. He slows the game down, he gets his angles, he makes better reads, and he finds a way to position into that isn't the OP angle. So I think FalleN was lacking something. And if you listen, he will totally admit in their prime, Cold Zero was a true secondary caller. He wasn't just the guy who said the order, because remember, Cold Zero was seeing it from the lurker position. He was seeing, like, what am I seeing set up? What can we do here? How do I want to be set up to try and close the round out potentially? I think what he's successfully also done, this is why the YEKINDAR move was underrated, it turns out, is YEKINDAR appears to be the secondary caller in their team, bro. And they're seeing the game. Remember, FalleN's a support back here, and YEKINDAR's the guy who's taking the... If you can actually have your player, who's the mechanical entry player, give you good information and good calls and let you... That's going to make your mid-round so much easier, mate. You've got information there. Remember, fans always forget this. If the reason I think karrigan entries on all his teams is, how the fuck else would he know what the entry's seeing? He wouldn't be there. He'd be on a different part of the map. He'd just see him die, or he'd see a kill in the... You wouldn't have any info to make the call off. So I think this has also been like a sort of like an underrated marriage between YEKINDAR and FalleN. It seems like they've both resurrected their careers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is an underrated point, and I think it's a good point as well to make, because YEKINDAR has always been a strong voice. I think even back in the good old VP days, I think jkaem have said a couple of times as well, or at least YEKINDAR stated that he was also trying to be the secondary in-game leader within that team, and that's why he even debated with Liquid to take over the in-game leading role and made the classic mistake, thinking that just because you're the secondary in-game leader or you're the secondary AWP, you can also be the main guy. It's two different jobs, but I think he's slowly but surely reverted back into the role that fits him the best, where yes, he can think about the game and prepare, before the game. But when he's on the server, then the most important thing for him is still to focus on his crosshair, focus on his entering, and then in terms of preparation, in terms of inspiration, in terms of sometimes, and that's another underrated aspect, when people talk about who's the better fit as a secondary in-game leader. You can't have your lurker who's most of the time staying alive or just saving your gun being the secondary in-game leader, because you don't really have too much time to think about what's going on. But if YEKINDAR is running in a banana and dies, let's say 15 seconds into the round, all of a sudden he may have a minute and 45 seconds to sit back and think, what can we do different? What can I do next round? Where should we maybe change? Or what do I see in this specific round that we should change next, etc., etc. So you get the luxury of sometimes when, as you said, with karrigan as well, and when you're the in-game leader or the secondary in-game leader, if you die early in a round, you have more time to process what happened, and you have more time to process and watch what's going on. Whereas if you're the lurker type, let's say FalleN, the way he's playing right now, he's staying alive way more than he used to. So he has more, I guess, focus in the round that he's in, more focus in the presence, where then he needs a guy like YEKINDAR who's more often than not maybe dies earlier in the round than he does to actually be that secondary voice, because he has a different perspective. So I think having that, dynamic in the team is important. And I think knowing, that, and I think that goes out to a lot of players in particular. Like if you play roles in the game where you are constantly saving, or you're constantly staying alive, or you want to be the guy who's left in a 2v2 or in a 3v3 all the times, you're third guy in, second guy in, it's probably not a good idea for you to be the secondary caller, because you don't have as much time to process what's going on. There's very few players who can do that. Nico is a great example. I think he's found a great balance of doing so. But when you look at most of the teams, if you want the strong voice of your team, to be a guy that actually has information to work with, that can process things, then let it be the guy who dies the earliest in the rounds, who then have the most time to actually figure it out, given that he has the brain capacity to process the information he's being presented. So I think that's a cool little nuance to the whole FURIA project. I think FURIA and in particular FalleN, probably, as you said, I didn't even think about the KSCERATO angle, like Forrest being, maybe he is just the type of guy that gives you that vibe. You know,
I have to speculate. I obviously don't know him, but I just get that vibe from him. You know, it just seems like he does.
Yeah, but I get it. When you described it, I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty much, you know, right on the money as in terms of how I see him when he's at tournaments. He doesn't seem like an outspoken guy. Yes. Doesn't seem like a guy with a big opinion. Doesn't seem like the guy who would make a statement to say, let's cut out, let's get someone else in, you know, because that should have happened 2 years earlier than it did. So I think you're right in that regard. So FURIA is interesting. And I think, you know, now that they've moved into become an international lineup that speaks English, as you said.
That's also exciting, right?
It is exciting because it's basically what Australia should have done 2 years ago. And now it's open. And now we get to know more about the players. And YEKINDAR, very outspoken. You know, I had an interview session with him during... that was Austin as well, I think, where he spoke about his personal life, spoke about how he was in a pit hole during Team Liquid times. He took a week off, you know, spent it with a psychologist, tried to get back in time, and he was really going through a tough time, something with his girlfriend not being able to move with him as well. So they were living separate, even though that they wanted to live together but couldn't because of, was it visa, was it documents or whatever. And that took a toll on him, and that kind of resolved in the later stages of his Liquid days, and he opened up. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think, you know, give it a couple of months now, we get to know more and more about the inner workings of Team FURIA, because we have people who are within the team who are outspoken, who are, if you approach them in a correct way, like you did with FalleN not so long ago, or like we did with YEKINDAR during the major, they will actually spill the beans. They will tell you stuff that we weren't really being able to access before. So I think that's also, you know, another little nuance that it would be cool to know more about KSCERATO. It would be cool to know more about yuurih, because there have been two players that, when you think of it, you know, they've been two of the biggest stars the game has had, at least from the Brazilian scene, for a long time, but no one really seems to know them outside of the Brazilian scene or outside of the team to actually get to play with them. So hopefully that's a ripple-on effect as well, where we can poke FalleN or poke YEKINDAR or poke molodoy, for that matter, in a year's time, and get to know more about two of the biggest influences Brazilian Counter-Strike has probably ever had.
By the way, I'll even give a little olive branch to YEKINDAR in that sense. In that sense, I actually feel for him in Team Liquid, because I always think there's a big, big difference between being on an international team that's European and being on Team Liquid. Like, if you're on Team Liquid, at least in the past, you probably have to live in North America. Like, that will take a toll. Like, one of the stories that always sticks with me is, this is why I have so much respect for when jkaem was on Renegades. Bro, he used to just have to live in, like, Detroit or wherever the fuck they lived, in a team house with a bunch of Aussies, so no cultural crossover there, by the way. No other Nordic players on the team, not even a fucking Gator as well. No one. So, and he even told me, right, not only did he miss home, and so he used to, like, try and fucking, like, do calls and shit like that. But he even told me once he went back for like a Thanksgiving, like Christmas type thing, and he'd forgotten how to speak Norwegian. And that's not a joke, because his brain had just only like worked in English for like a year. And that's fucking... But if you're doing that, right, and then you get the results, you get extra points, mate. You get a little bonus. You get a little gold star next to your name. Because I agree, like, if you're... I'll give you an example. I don't know if Rops has a girlfriend, but if he does, tell you what, he can see her every other fucking week. Every time the tournament's over, he goes back to Estonia, gets in his fucking sports car or whatever, and then his girlfriend's there. Like, that's actually one of the most OP things about Counter-Strike, if people don't know. In League of Legends, even if you're a European player, you move to Berlin, you have to live in a team house there. Like, that's different if you're from a totally different country. I agree, and you're not going to get you don't get your cultures, all sorts of shit. That's good. I mean, you've had to say yourself.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's funny that you bring up your Renegades. Like, one of the, I don't know if I ever said that, but one of the teams who reached out after I
think you said it in our interview.
Oh, I did, yeah, okay. Yeah, that was Renegades. They wanted to sign me and bring me to Detroit, and I was like, let's say the salary was twice the amount I was earning in Team Liquid. The whole financial package was super solid, but the thought of living in Detroit, the thought of living away from home again, and the thought of living in a team house with people who may or may not be my types, you know, I didn't know the guys back then, so I didn't even want to say neither good or bad stuff about them. jkaem seemed like a nice guy. JKS seemed like a guy I could vibe with, but I didn't know. Just the thought of living in Detroit, regardless of how much money was actually on the contract, just made me say no. Like, I didn't want to do it at all. So I agree with you. Players who make that move, players who actually move away from whatever they love, whatever base they have, whatever rhythm they have, whatever everyday life they have, it does make it harder for them to perform, and that's what Counter-Strike is all about. It's performance, and it's not like using it as an excuse. It's just another factor they have to take into account, that if you want to be a player that is making that move, if you want to go from Europe to live in NA, or if you want to go from NA to live in Europe, then you better make it up with yourself if you are capable of doing so. If you think you're the personality who would thrive in that environment, or who would thrive maybe not feeling too well. And I think there's a lot of players who'll be like, yeah, I'll figure it out. And then they come into the situation, and then it all explodes. And I think, just for the fans' perspective as well, it doesn't matter how good you are. I think when Shox signed for Team Liquid, that was one of the worst signings of all time. And I don't know how much ever got out about that, but obviously speaking with some of the players and speaking with some of the Liquid guys as well, as I understood it, Shox was like, yeah, we'll move my entire family to NA. I'll come to Los Angeles or wherever, and I'll live over here. And then signs the contract. 2 weeks after he signed the contract, he was like, nope, don't want to live in NA. And then what? Now you signed a contract, you're going to play with us for the next 2 years, but you don't want to live in NA anymore, and we can't force you to do it. So how do we do this? And it's just, players think they can do whatever the fuck they want without giving it a second thought. And I think sometimes that's something that, it'll be good to read some history books, or watch some of your in-depth interviews with players who's made that move, because it's so much more difficult than people initially think, especially when you have to perform. It's another thing if you go to a different country and all you have to do is basically set up a new everyday life. Sure, it can be rough and it can take some time to find friends, but if it's rough for a month or 2 months or 3 months, then so be it, you'll figure it out. But if it's rough for 2 or 3 or 4 months while you have to perform at your absolute best, then odds are you won't perform. And then odds are that there'll be more pressure from all the fans. There'll be more pressure from your teammates. There'll be more pressure from your family, who's like, why the fuck are you in NA when you suck at Counter-Strike apparently and you can't perform over there? Then it doesn't make sense all of a sudden. So it's very complicated. And I think it just made me think of that whole Shox story where it's like, okay, you just, that never made sense to anyone. Yeah. And I think it was actually, without speaking too much bad about Shox, he was one of my favorite players of all time, a nice guy as well. I think it was ridiculous to treat another team like that, to promise them to move over to their base and then just refusing after signing a contract.
This, Pimp. My favourite little detail about Shox is, back in the day when those teams, the very games of the type, were all like right there with Nip and Fnatic as the best teams in the world. I used to be the one who was like, because I loved existence, but then I was battling happy. I was at every after party talking to these guys because they would always try to argue CS and try and tell me all stuff I didn't know behind the scenes that should change my mind. Because by the way, one thing I'll give credit to people like AWPex and the Frenches, they didn't just get salty and just block you. They would try and win you over and make you understand why they're doing things that are better than you think, and it's genius. Which is by the way, it's a very effective technique against analysts. The problem is, they were fucking with Thorin, mate. And you go tell some other ones that they might just listen to you and say on the broadcast, bro. So I was battling them back. And one of the things I remember them telling me, and I remember just going, holy fuck, that's too perfect, is that within his teams, Shox's nickname was Princess. Because you had to do everything his way, bro. He had to be the most comfortable one who got his way. And essentially, that's why, no joke, whether he's good or bad, Smith's had to be in the team. Because Shox needs him there. That's like some entourage shit, bro. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't feel comfortable unless my brother is with me. That was real shit. And the problem Shox ran into is this. You were the shit, bro. When you were the shit, listen, there's plenty of players in football and stuff that have been a package deal. If we need that, yeah, we'll do it. If you're the shit, you're scoring 30 goals a season. If you're scoring 3 and you're still taking all the space, we're not going to do any of that, mate. And even worse, I agree with you. Shox himself, actually, that's a little bit of I'd say poor self-awareness. He should have understood where he was in his career and what he really wanted. Because that commitment to me almost says scratch out the name and the year it is. I'm just going to be Shoxy from 2015 or 2012 or something. I'm going to be the old Shox. I'm going to be so good. This won't matter. I'll bring my whole family. It's going to be great. It's that even seems implausible from his side. By the way, this links to a perfect topic. Let's talk about this is the last topic. Obviously, the drama, which never should have been a drama. The drama at this tournament about FaZe Clan should be, wow, they've got this roster where it's got Jacob and it's got Twist. How's Twist going to play when he returns? Is Jacob going to take Rain's spots? Let's see what this new FaZe is like. But because of this stupid thing where, and by the way, it's obviously on FaZe management here, they didn't look up that the VRS invite was based on having, you needed basically karrigan, Rain, plus another. It had to be Elise or Simple. They weren't in position where they're eligible to play the tournaments. They had to bring Rain back out of nowhere. So now Jacob sits out, which is a move some people maybe even wanted at first, but who knows? And now they've got this weird thing where they're doing what's like a Frankenstein roster, because in reality, surely this isn't going to actually be the real roster. They're just going to play this. By the way, this thing that still hasn't been resolved yet is, as far as I know, some of the other invites might be based on this. Not the CAC one, but some of the other invites are based on the VRS one. So I don't know if they square that one. So now we've got this draft. So there's two angles you can go with here. We can do, I thought, because of the shock set, we can do the rain angle, because I feel like there's an obvious conversation there that people just don't want to have because it's awkward. Here's the real problem, Pimp. My problem goes like this. If Rain had said, I'm retiring, that's the end of my whole career, then yeah, I don't think that's the time to go, yeah, but you also weren't that good at the end and you were kind of shit at a few tournaments, and plus, what even was your role? Like, what, you just do what you want and karrigan doesn't IGL, like he said in an interview for me. You know, if you do all that, that's kind of a bit rude, because he's retiring, he's a legend. He said he's not retiring, boys. He said he's going to keep playing, and I'm sorry, I have a harsh rule like this. It feels like we're on the same boat, mate. You know what? I'll call one person out, because it's not really a call out. He just says all these opinions publicly, so he obviously believes them. Yanko is the opposite to us, bro. If you were a great player at any point in time, now I see where Nico fucking has this mindset, mate. He'll never say you should be cut from the team. Like, he would never say ever to cut yuurih from FURIA, because yuurih used to be really good. So in his mind, you give him a chance, he'll get back to that. If you're Rain, he's thinking of the legendary Rain, the MVP. By the way, that was 3+ years ago. He's thinking of that guy. You never cut that guy, you fool. He would say that about any FalleN. He would say about FalleN, bro. He would say about FalleN on the AWP, for fuck's sake. Because his whole shit is sort of like, maybe he just views players as more static, or he thinks if he recreate a scenario, you can bounce back. You know, I'm a bit more cynical. I do think once you start the downslide, there's very few people make the upturn again. There's a reason why even teams are like that, bro. Even teams that are on top fall off and they very rarely ever go back to number one. So the problem with the Rain topic is this: if he is going to keep playing and he doesn't want to play for €2,000 a month, Pimp, then he's going to be saying to someone the Shoxy thing: give me 15 to 20k a month, and you know what? I don't want to be the support. I want to be Rain. Well, if you do that, mate, I have to know that what Rain currently is today. It doesn't help me that you, by the way, if I sign you, I don't get that major from 3 years ago. I have to get the guy today. That's why FaZe was actually one of the rare teams that you could say, for his service, we're giving him extra time, giving him more runway, always going, let's see with another roster if you can still play the team. I think that's kind.
Yeah, but that's the fucked up part about this, because I think there's more nuance to it. I think Rain, I've said it. Yeah, I said it before, and I think I said it during the Paris Major, maybe even. Like, maybe it's not far off Rain retiring. You know, that was during the time when I think he was becoming a dad for the first time. I think he was declining a little bit in level, and I was just posing the question. You know, maybe soon enough, and then. Yeah, it is, but whenever you do that, you know, trust me, there will be a shit ton of personalities, you know, highly rated personalities within our community who's like, how dare you? How dare you say that? Or I know we just signed a new contract. What a stupid thing to say. It's not about whether he's retiring or not. It's about now would be a pretty good time to do it. So let's have a conversation about it, you know, regardless of what he may or may not feel. I thought Rain, coming into this season, probably should have been cut from FaZe. I don't think FaZe should have started 2025 with Rain. I also do think that they did him super, super dirty. Now, with Elish coming into the lineup, with them keeping Rain, put him in some different roles, put him in some different circumstances, not really made it out to perform. And I think he did okay. I think he actually progressed, you know, in that role and did a decent job, but not a good enough job to keep him on the lineup. I would agree with that. So heading into the summer break, I was like, I could justify getting rid of Rain now. You know, I think he did better than we expected in the roles, but I could justify still removing him, finding someone else. And then I think he had an uptick. Then I think he started to play well. Then Elish went away from the lineup, and I thought to myself, maybe Rain is coming back into his new roles. And the first couple of tournaments we saw after the summer break, he was actually playing quite well. His stats are up. I think he's up 0.04, 0.05 compared to before the summer break after, which is pretty decent, especially knowing that he was probably going to get cut anyway. So he's been playing somewhat decent. And then you bring in jkaem, a guy that, I'll be honest, you know, I don't know what the potential is, and I don't know what they see in him, but I don't think he's better than Rain. I don't think he's better than Rain. I don't think if you're FaZe right now and you're heading into the next major and you want to do a good result, I think Rain is a better option than jkaem. I think you have a higher chance.
People didn't like it, Pimp, because it's the same argument as when we all were doing the thing of like, if you sign Thorin and Zontic wants to play, maybe you just take his way out, even though you just signed him. I know that sounds fucked up, but you want the best roster. But this way, the reason it's conflicted for me is if I had to choose, I've never seen the potential of jkaem. I think he was all right. And the problem is he didn't hit the ground running in FaZe. So to me, this roster they're playing now is actually what I would have made the roster. I would have said, listen, Twist, it's on you, boy. You're going to be the star player and you better be fucking good because Rain and karrigan are both staying. So we'll give it one last season, try it with this roster. I know what you mean, but the problem is this, as far as we can tell, this is already a standing situation. They're just doing this because they have to.
That's the thing, and I agree. I think the roster they're playing with the Pro League should have been the roster. I think they should have given away. The thing is for FaZe, you can always make the case that okay, you look at the team. Is it important for FaZe right now to build a future with potentially jkaem, who could evolve into be a great player? I don't know what they see in him. They would know that better than we do. I don't think that's the case. I think FaZe desperately needs good results right now. They desperately need a good major. They desperately need a good finish at Pro League.
By the way, remember, it's even implied by the rumours, maybe Frozen will leave if he doesn't like things. That was on the table, apparently, yeah.
Why would he waste some of his best years in a team that is dysfunctional when he's as good as he is? Brokey coming in and out, Twist coming in and out, karrigan dropping down to a level where it's I've said that before, I think I tweeted it a couple of weeks ago. I think we're at a point now where karrigan, individually speaking, as much as I agree with you in terms of how he's setting his team up and entering, I think there's a bare minimum you have to do in terms of your productivity on the server, and I think karrigan is flirting with that line right now to a point where if it doesn't get better, he has to go.
Put it this way, I'm not an idiot, Pimp. It's the reason why I pushed so hard for Simple to be on the team. Because I'll tell you what, if Simple can actually get to the level where on LAN at tier 1, he can drop a 1.25 rating every tournament, suddenly that literally, do the math, that can allow karrigan to live. Exactly. The problem is, if that's Brokey, karrigan's pack your bags, mate. You've got 6 months, you know what I mean?
yeah, that's the point, So I agree. I think to circle it back to Rain, I think he was done a bit dirty. I think Rain, as I said, I would have called for him to probably be cut in the beginning of 25. Yes. I probably would have said heading into the summer break 25.
And also, if someone's that loyal a servant for you, come on, make it at one of the player breaks. Because you give them a chance then to go to another team. There's no team he could join now and play at the major for him. Nobody's going to sign him. It's not going to happen.
No.
It'd have to be next year anyway, probably after the major. And even then, you sit on the bench and do nothing? It's actually probably helping him. He has to play now. What would you do if you sat out, right, your reign at the end of your career, you sit out all these months, the major happens. I mean, again, I challenged people on Hot Take Point Mate to do this. Go look at the top 15 teams. Obviously, half of them speak other languages. You will have a hard time picking a team that should add him, bro. Because what will happen is, and I'll tell you an underrated detail as well, and this is a bummer because I'm a big fan of Rain individually. The biggest bummer is this, right? 2 of the things that people love about Rain is that because he's been in FaZe forever, it's like he said in this, karrigan said this last year when they had that period where he had to change his IGL and stuff. He said, Rain, I don't really even have to IGL him. He doesn't do attack. He just does his shit and he sort of figures out his space and then I call the rest, right? The problem I had a realisation I've never heard anyone verbalise before, which is Rain's only ever been in one team, really. Look, yes, he was in LGB 1 million years ago with a bunch of people that no one could even name who were Norwegian. But realistically, his whole career, he's been in some variant of G2 Fate, right? And those squads were all loose teams with a bunch of fraggers. That's why they're at their best when they had karrigan, because he could pilot the loose fraggers, right? Essentially, Pimp, he's never played tactical Counter-Strike.
No, that's a good point.
So there's another problem. Yeah. What team can I put you in? In the modern day, every young IGL and coach, it's like football, mate. They're all in on the fucking tactics. You know what I mean? They're all in on the X's and O's and watching the demo. Again, if you're bringing Rain in, is that his shit? I don't know.
That's the fucked up part, though, because I saw him, coming out and saying that he potentially want to explore becoming an in-game leader. Yeah. I think I said that in the latest episode. Either you choose to 100% dedicate you to becoming, you make it known that if you sign me, it's as an in-game leader, or if you sign me, it's as a role player, as I've been throughout my entire career. And I think if Rain want to be an in-game leader, go for it. If he thinks he can do that job and that can motivate him to play Counter-Strike for another 2 or 3 years, go for it, because sometimes you need a change of scenery to still stay motivated or maybe, give some of that experience that you built up throughout all these years. That's fine and fair. But I think Rain would have had a higher chance of actually landing a decent team as a role player. Because I think what he did show after the summer break was that he was still a decent player. He was still a good player.
By the way, he's still for a role player, he has decent mechanics, at least decent. They're a lot better than you'd expect for someone his age, put it that way.
He does, and as much as I want to say, right, we'll give Brokey a bit of a leeway, saying that, he's playing in a dysfunctional phase. Sure. We'll give Frozen a bit of leeway in a dysfunctional phase. Well, Rain is also part of that dysfunctional phase. Yes. What happens if Rain gets into a machinery like, dare say, Na'Vi? Like, what if Rain would come into Na'Vi and plays, some of the role positions within Na'Vi, maybe free up a little bit more to make him, stand out more as a star player or whatnot? Don't tell me that Rain couldn't do the same numbers he's doing in FaZe within Na'Vi. I think he would be even better. And what he's doing in FaZe right now, or before he got cut, was okay. As of right now, they're playing Astralis. He's top fracking. He's entry fracking like crazy. He's not a bad player by any means. He's not a Rain that is posting a 1.15 rating on average every single tournament. It's a Rain that gives you a 105 or 106 or 107, which for a lot of teams is still valuable.
Yeah,
that is good, especially in the roles that he's playing. That's also part of the context. That if you're a star player and that's your average output, not good enough. If you're a role player and you sacrifice and you do your own thing and it doesn't require a teammate to throw a flash for you and you just go to the side of the map and do your own thing and you're putting up a 105, 107, 108, that's fine. So I think Rain would have had a higher chance actually, maybe staying away from the in-game leading duties and try to land a team as the role player he is, especially now that he's having this golden opportunity where he can play as a stand-in for FaZe and maybe change his mentality a little bit, where he hunts a little bit more eco-fractional or takes bigger risks because it's not his team anyway, where he maybe gets to stand out as a better player and then make the signing for next season. I think him saying he wants to be an in-game leader, as you said, that probably made that he's not joining a tier 1 team. He's probably having to go down to tier 2, tier 3, rebuild himself as an in-game leader, almost do the snacks route, and then try to get into a tier 1 team again, which... if he can do it, by all means go for it. I think that's going to be incredible difficult. And Snacks was kind of lucky that G2 was his 4th or 5th choice, that no one else wanted to sign with them and go for him. Otherwise, Snacks would have been stuck in Gamer Legion and probably would have been gone by now. So I think it's going to be incredible tough for Rain to go that route, unfortunately.
By the way, a few things, so we can wrap after this, right? One, because basically, actually what you said about the other note, I could have just said that also celebrities and other players, basically the Yanko angle just applies to them too. They also like the person, they're friends with him, they respect him, and they remember him at his best. So they're doing that thing of like, well, here's the problem I've always had with that. I'll give you a list of players: Crims, dupreeh, Shocks, Forest, Rain. If you want to say to me, how dare you say that, he can still play well, then sign him to your team. Sign it. It's called skin in the game. Put him on your team and you play with him. Then, you know what? If you then succeed, I'll say I was totally wrong and you were totally right. If, on the other hand, what you really mean is, I really like dupreeh, he used to be a legend and I love having a drink with him at the bar, I don't think it's reasonable that someone else should pay him 20k a month to keep playing because you say that. I think you're now being a diva. You're taking your status and being a fucking diva. I'm not saying this because I don't like the person. I'm trying to actually be like reasonable to analyse the fucking scene and look at like player transfers like we would in football, etc. So I'll also say this. There's two other quick angles. One is, another reason why Rain can't just stay in FaZe in the old role he used to have and will have a hard time in another team is this. The most famous Rain CT position in the world is Nuke CT side outer. It's where he dominated and won a major. That was 3.5 years ago. He isn't one of the top players at that position, and that is even a position that is classically going to big fraggers. That is where you put one of your star players. So he's not walking into a team and they're going, take outside on Nuke. No, mate, you're not going to get that role. You're going to get a way worse role than that. You're going to be like the fucking rotator or the guy who dies first on the floor. So you're not going to get that role. So that's why I agree with you. You got to know that you're a supportive element if you're in now.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's the same on AWPer. It's like two well-known positions.
Absolutely.
CT side, Rain toilets, Rain CT side, Nuke. You're right. It's going to be very difficult for him to get those roles unless he's willing to, I don't know, join NRG,
Yeah, that's also true.
Try to
just go down a level.
There exactly. And to be fair, there's a world where he will do that. I'm not, again, quite familiar with his family situation, but I do believe his wife is from Canada or the States or something, Sonia or whatever.
Oh, okay. I think she's from Russia, isn't she? I don't know. Maybe she's American as well. I don't know.
Maybe I'm completely wrong.
Maybe she's American as well. I don't know, mate.
Whatever, I think there's a world that maybe if he's willing to bring his family on like Shocks and go for that route, then do it, But as I said, I think it's difficult for Rain, and I agree with your point that it's going to be almost impossible for him to walk into, like, if any tier 1 or tier 2 team were actually willing to take the risk on Rain, it would be to put him into some shit positions. It would not to be absolutely to put him into the old good Rain position that would make him explore that old self. So it is a quite difficult position for him to be in. And when I say that I don't think he made a mistake saying he wants to be the in-game leader, because if that's what he truly wants, then that is not the wrong decision. But I'm just saying that it's going to be difficult no matter what route he's going to land the dream job. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because I do think that right now, at least for this part of the season, I think he should be playing the major with FaZe. I think he should be part of the starting lineup. I don't think jkaem have shown me enough at the tournament he's played so far that it's willing to take that risk in a situation right now where I feel FaZe desperately needs good results. I'm all about building for the future, all about maybe he's great in practice, maybe he's a great teammate, maybe karrigan sees something in him he can morph for the future, but just wait half a year then and do it by then, because right now you need results, and I don't think you're getting that with jkaem.
I don't think Rain, first of all, he's also not the sort of person who'd watch a fucking podcast, if you know, guys. He's also in that KSCERATO fucking Forest category where they play CS, bro. That's what they do. They're not even really media people. So, but I would say this, a piece of advice to players like Rain, though. If you ever do that, because basically that post to me, Pimp, I know what you mean. That doesn't say, I'm really excited to be an IGL. What it means is, I just want to play tier 1 again. So you know what? If I have to be an IGL, I'll do that too. It's like you've almost thrown that in there, whereas I agree with you. That's something where it's more like you have to be like, no, this is my career now. Like I'm making that pivot. If you actually want to do that, I actually have a piece of advice I don't think any pro has thought of, which is if you're benched and you've put that out there, like you're open to being an IGL, right? Right now, nobody is going to take the chance on you because you've never done the role before. In fact, in the case of Rain, no one even sees him as a player that like. Would he be a player who'd be good at? No one can even guess, bro. Nobody has it. We're not inside his mind. I think the advice I would give to someone like that would be this. Literally reach out. Remember, there's no poaching rules in CS, bro. Reach out to coaches you respect. Find coaches you think play the game the right way, you'd love to play with them and work with them, and tell one of those coaches, look, obviously don't pick the ones that have like fucking the best IGLs now. Pick one where you think it's plausible they might replace the IGL. And if you can get in contact with that coach and just have some chats, just tell them, how do you see the game? What would you like to do there? That is how you could get yourself into a team, bro. Because then when they come to the point where they want to gamble or make a change, maybe then they would bring you in for the veteran presence. Like I'm obviously thinking of teams like a Gamer Legion type scenario. Yeah, maybe that sort of a coach would be into it. Maybe he could see your vision. The problem is, so many players have this big problem where they think they can just sit on the bench and that teams will just come and get them. Whereas I actually think now that is not what CS is right now. CS right now is everyone gambling on young players, bro. They're not going for the old guard like that. Like there's a lot of big name players that the second they step away from that tier 1 team, you will not see them play CS again, or you will see them just have to go, like we're saying, to like a tier 2.5 team or tier 2 team. And then that effectively is the end of your career anyway, probably. So on the IGL angle, I think you can't just hope it happens. You can't just throw it. Yeah, I'd like to be IGL. No, you got to do something about it, mate.
Yeah, it's a good advice, but it's also like it depends on the financials of it as well.
Yeah,
he's
of
already
course,
been in FaZe for what nine and a half years, and I reckon he's been paid, 20.
That's actually, I think, the biggest concern, Pimp, is I don't know. Like I said, I don't know that he wants to play for 7K a month in Norway. You know what I mean? Like, I think if he plays, he wants to play for like a good salary still, which is the problem is that's going to limit your options.
Yeah, that makes it difficult for Rain, without a doubt. It's a precautious position to be in for him, because I do think, as I said, I really, really, really do think that he could still offer a lot to a lot of different teams, but he cannot offer enough that he's worth 25K a month or 30K a month when you can go with another guy who's only maybe at 7, 8, 9K, who's a future prospect as well. So in that regard, I get it, but it's not like I don't know. Mentioned, look at the top 15 teams. You're right. There's a couple of teams where I could make the case, but that's about it, So it's a tough one for Rain. I'm curious to see if he's going to land a team or not. And maybe at Pro League, they're playing Astralis right now. Probably going to knock them out because they fucking suck. And if he's having a great tournament, then maybe there's, as much as I hate saying it because I think it's stupid, Counter-Strike is a lot about recency bias. So if he's having a great tournament at Pro League, then a lot of teams will be like, maybe you should pick up Rain. Maybe he can be a great in-game leader. Whereas if he sucks at Pro League, then they'll be like, oh, he's washed, he's over, he's done for. Sure. So it's like, it's a tough moment for him to be in right now, but at least he has an opportunity. And especially if what you said is right, that maybe FaZe will have to field him for another tournament, then when you go into a tournament where you have to play for yourself, you're no longer, going to be part of the main team. So you can actually allow yourself to be a little bit cynical in that regard and maybe take more risk as a player and maybe look a little bit better on the server than you would have had you been the loyal soldier for karrigan. So maybe there's a chance for Rain to still impress a few teams and change the notion. But from where I sit right now as well, looking at the top 15, even top 20 for that matter, it's tough unless he wants to play in Gamer Legion or Heroic at 7K a month.